Long Take Review, a film podcast with one eye always on the Oscar race. I'm your host, Jen Subchuk-Tankard, and I'm here with my fellow actors. First, he's a king. This is his theater. It's PT McNiff. How's it going, PT?
So, are you acting at all during this podcast, Jen? I'm doing well, Jen. How are you?
I'm doing great, although slightly offended by your question. And he has some questions about how time travel works in this. It's Greg Cass. How's it going, Greg?
This is a clemency hearing for your sentence of 25 to life. Did I pick that because it was the first line in the trailer? Maybe I did. Who can tell? I'm good, Jen. How are you?
I like it though. It works on it's meta because I feel like I'm being sentenced every time I have to host the show. No, I'm just kidding.
Hey.
And last but not least, he'll be reading the role of Hamlet. It's Antonio Elefano. How are you doing, Antonio?
We're here to become human again and enjoy things that are not in our reality.
Amazing. I feel like any response I would have to that would be spoilery, so I'm gonna hold. But listeners, those were all references to the film we are here today to review, Greg Kwedar's Sing Sing, starring a Best Actor nominee from last year, Colman Domingo. Sing Sing is playing in theaters, though we were discussing this before we started recording, maybe not all of them. So for example, for me, normally I have like a half dozen theaters sort of in my local area that are playing most things. Sing Sing was literally in one theater near me that I had to go to this weekend. So it is, and I've heard some critics sort of speculate about like their awards campaign and like, are they holding it to try to make it last to the Oscars, that kind of thing. But yeah, we'll talk later about that. So we do expect this film to make a play for the Oscars. So it likely won't be long before, if it's not playing near you, that it will be soon. And it's an A24 film. So eventually, though, again, it might be a while because it's this, if they're holding out for the Oscars in the spring, it will be streaming on Max because A24 has a deal with Max now. The story of the film follows a group of incarcerated men who are trying to put on a play as a part of the Rehabilitation through the Arts program. And this is based on a true story, so it's sort of like a docudrama. If you are listening to us for the first time, we will have a spoiler-free section designed for those who have not yet seen the film. And then with a very clear spoiler alert, we will go into spoiler mode for the rest of the show. PT, if listeners think we should be set free after listening to this episode, or maybe they should be set free, I don't know which way to take that joke. What can they do?
If they don't want to commute their sentence with us, then they should follow the Long Take Review wherever they get their podcasts. We host the feed on Jen's Substack at thelongtake.substack.com, but you can also find us on all your regular podcatchers, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Overcast, YouTube, and more. You can also follow us on social media at Instagram and Threads. Our handle is at The Long Take Review, or you can find us on Letterboxd. The account is at LTRpod, or you can follow the hashtag LTRpod to see each of our individual reviews. Jen?
Thanks, PT. So we are just about ready to get into our discussion of Sing Sing, but first we have a quick but notable movie news update.
Just in off the wire, it's your Hollywood news.
Okay, so there was some pretty important news. It seems like maybe not everyone heard this news, so I'm excited to see what everyone's reaction is in real time. But Joaquin Phoenix apparently just walked away from a project he had developed with Todd Haynes. So this is not the director of Joker. That's Todd Phillips. Todd Haynes is the director of more recently May December from last year. Most people probably know Far From Heaven. A lot of films that a lot of us on this show like. And so he apparently brought this film to Todd Haynes and to the producers to develop, and then they were about to start shooting. It was like 5 days before they were supposed to start shooting, and he walked out. So this has really rocked the industry because a bunch of producers are like, because apparently this is a really taboo, like people do not do this because the tons of people are already out of work, and like the production now has to scramble to like make sure everybody gets paid for the work they've already done, even though the movie's not going to come out. there's the reporting on this was really spotty in terms of like nobody seems to know exactly why he did this, but the premise of the film was a same sex relationship. Apparently was NC-17 at one point. And Joaquin Phoenix, to my knowledge, is straight. And so I think there's a lot of discourse around and speculation surrounding maybe he got cold feet. He like thought he wanted to do this role. And then that's the only thing people have to go on. And that's highly speculative. So did anyone know about this?
I did. It was, yeah. I mean, I was seeing it in the context of Oscar race discussions, both for the possibility of this movie. Todd Haynes usually has a strong cachet at getting actors nominated. It hasn't always happened recently, as we know, but also the general Joaquin Phoenix Joker 2 is coming out this year, and if this was going to hurt him in that regard. I had the initial report that I had seen was that they were already in filming when it started, but I guess that's fuzzy as to whether it was he left like 2 or 3 days before or 2 or 3 days into. But either way, it was at past a point of no return, and is going to be the movie's not going to happen now, and is damaging to all the people who have spent all this time working on it and who maybe turned down other jobs, from Todd Haynes down to catering and people who just do regular work on the set. So yeah, looks really bad. Just a big reputation hit for Joaquin Phoenix, and it's going to be frustrating to see him trying to walk this back or figure out what happened. And I have a feeling there's going to be a lot of anonymous comments, backbiting stories in the trades for a little while.
So the thing I had seen, and then I want everyone else's reaction, was that they had built a lot of sets. So it's like they were pretty much ready to go, but maybe hadn't actually done any shoots yet. So yeah, past the point of no return, I think is the takeaway. But yeah, what do we think?
I had seen this news before, but in terms of why um, they couldn't just recast, was it because of the nature of how like Joaquin Phoenix brought this project to Todd Haynes, that there wasn't like a traditional sort of like process where they were like looking at other actors, and and also I think Joaquin Phoenix was probably involved on the production side of things too, and then that's another part of the reason where maybe like other producers involvement was contingent upon his participation, and that's the reason why. Because like I do think that this is unusual in like how like far into the production it is that he's dropping out, but but I think other actors have left production where they've just moved to like the number two person on the list, but it seems like there just never was a number two. Is that basically, am I right that seems what's happened here?
Yeah, because I think I was surprised that it was so unanimous. Like multiple critics were like, "And this movie's dead. Like they're not going to make it now."
Yeah.
And I think it's because they had the money that they had gotten for it already. Like the promise of the movie from producers and stuff was that Joaquin Phoenix was the selling point, that he was going to get people to go to the theater, right? Because he's a movie star and he's an Oscar winner. Like, so yeah, I don't know. There probably is something more nuanced underneath that in terms of the financial part of it that makes it so they can't just recast it. But yeah, I don't know. Greg, I guess you were the only one. Sorry, I thought nobody else knew this. You're the only one who hadn't heard this. So what do you think? You're hearing it for the first time.
I guess I was in the woods of New Hampshire all weekend, so I suppose I didn't have the right Hollywood wire on, as the voice a few minutes ago said. I was just thinking about how, like, I have always respected Joaquin Phoenix's talent, but it's not like I've ever seen him and been like, that seems like a reasonable guy. Not at all, a big presence on set. So it doesn't necessarily surprise me that he would kind of do something like this in a kind of cliche spoiled actor kind of way. That may be unfair because we don't know the details, so we should save room for that, right? It's entirely possible that he has a legitimate reason to do it, but from this kind of first glance at the story, that's the part of it. And you mentioned it, and I'll just pull again on the string, like, post strikes, there's not a lot of production going on right now, and it's shocking to me. I follow a lot of kind of stand-up comedian screenwriter types on social media, and they're all dying for work. And so to think about,
Yeah.
as PT said, every category on a film set, and just think that like all that falls apart, it is pretty bad form right now. Your initial question was, will this hurt Joker 2? Everybody I've ever met who's a huge Joker fan would not care the least about this. They're
That's true.
busy on Reddit and not this. But I think I never got the Joker thing. I just don't. It's fine. It's an interesting performance, but the fact that it was both a $1 billion movie and like a Best Picture nominee, I never ever understood. So I think the worm is already turned on for Joker 2, that people are like, nah, I don't think so. Maybe I'll have egg on my face come December, but I think the kind of critical establishment is already like, what were we drinking that we thought this was a good movie? So they'll move on, and this won't really impact that. Or if it does, it'll just be part of the like, yeah, this fell short, is my guess.
All right. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what the discourse surrounding Joker 2 will be now. Because it will be hard to separate, did this do poorly because of the movie itself? Is this not getting any Oscar traction because of this particular scandal? Like, it will be hard. No one will be able to actually know or isolate sort of the cause and effect. But yeah, it'll be a part of the discourse, certainly. So
it does feel like now the Joker 2 press tour is going to be, what is Joaquin Phoenix going to say about leaving that other movie, and not about what is happening with Joker 2. And trying to put, it feels like they were setting it up to be like, we're going to talk about Lady Gaga as the new addition, and maybe she's overdue for a performance Oscar, but instead it feels like it's going to take a lot of the oxygen, and I don't think it's going to care for Joker fans, and I don't think the movie will be less successful at the box office because of this. But there may be people in the Academy that are like, nah, whatever, I'm not voting for that guy, and that may bleed over because it's his character's name is the title. It may bleed over into the rest of the movie, separate from any Joker hangover, so to speak, that may exist from the first movie.
All right, so I want to get to Sing Sing. Let's start with everybody's short takes. What do you think about this movie?
I thought this was a really beautiful film taking place in a definitely unbeautiful location. We've all seen a number of prison movies and prison TV shows, and with that comes like certain expectations. And what I loved most about this movie was that it did exactly what I expected it to do incredibly well, while avoiding some of the common plot devices that I associate with prison movies. Like, that was, PT and I watched this together, and when we were walking out, like, that was one of the first things I talked about, was like, I thought this was going to happen but it didn't, and I was so happy. And then this, I thought this was going to happen and it didn't. um but yeah, I highly recommend it. I really enjoyed it. PT, since I saw it with you, what are your thoughts?
I mean, I'm going to echo what you said, which was is based on our conversation walking out of that theater, which is that at every moment where it felt like, oh, this is going to become cliche, this is going to take the obvious path, it chose something else, and it didn't subvert expectations and such. Oh no, it's so wildly different from what you expected, but it had that extra level, that extra layer of thoughtfulness in the storytelling. And the ensemble is so strong, and does work that resonates so much with me, that I had a wonderful time. For a movie I was a little bit worried was going to be kind of a weepy kind of, I mean, not in a bad way, but kind of a drag of like, oh yes, it is very bad to be in prison. That does seem awful, and that it was just going to sort of be reiterating that point. But it was very sort of life affirming, and had this, it had this positivity to it. So I very strongly enjoyed it. Greg, how about you?
I think it's well established on this podcast that I love summer blockbuster season. And yet there comes a moment every year in August where I get to see the leaves start to churn and a crisp air. And I throw on my scarf and beret and head out to the first like real awards contender of the year. And that was this movie for me. I left the theater blown away. And I will say I enjoyed the entire runtime, and then the closing, the closing credits, like have something we'll talk about later. That it's just like holy cow. So I full-heartedly endorse this. I was at a social gathering yesterday, and somebody's like, "You see movies? What's the like one movie out right now my wife and I should get a sitter for?" And I unreservedly said, "Sing Sing." I was like, "That's the one that's worth your time right now." All due respect to the power of Glenn Powell in a white T-shirt and Twisters, we got twins. But like you gotta go to something this beautiful and this special, and we are big components of seeing movies in theaters on this podcast. But like even a quiet movie like this, where you can be in a room and feel that kind of pregnant anticipation of everybody there. I just will also agree with PT's comment that the ensemble is really deep. Like I was expecting the Coleman Domingo show, and it is the Coleman Domingo show, but there are a lot of really good performances here that are really well done. And Jen, now you hated this movie, right? So you're our detracting voice. Go ahead.
Nope. Sorry. I'm going to disappoint you. I love this movie. I left because I'm a weirdo. I left this movie both loving it on its own, but also being like, Oscar season, let's go. Like, because I feel like this has been the first movie I've seen this year, and says a lot because of my deep love of Dune Part 2. But I was like, we have a Best Picture nominee. Like this, I will be super surprised. Sorry to spoil our Oscars watch later, but I just got really excited because I was like, oh, like not only is this actually a really well done movie, and I think it really does strike such a perfect balance between not shying away from issues surrounding incarceration, and it's not sugarcoating anything, right? But at the same time, there's so much hope and joy in the story, and humanity, and so it's just a really beautiful mix. Like it, and I just kept being astonished. I'm like, how is this working? Like, like on paper, this sounds like a horrible, cheesy movie. Like I don't know. So I really enjoyed the movie on its own, but also was like, this is the perfect thing where it's like I can actually support this movie for an Oscars campaign because I really like it, but at the same time, it's also gonna be Oscar baity. Like the Academy, I think, is gonna love this movie, and because it is this mixture of like feel good but also realist. Like it's not glossing over the reality of the situation in a way that really works well. So yeah, that's my short take. So recommendation algorithm, Greg sort of, which I'm going to officially put us in which we establish the audience of a film. So not every film is for everyone, but apparently Greg thinks everyone should go see this movie. So would
Well,
like how wide an audience are we recommending this to, or like is it? Yeah.
I will just say the social gathering I was at was like the New Yorker reading, like we all talk about our book podcast crowd. So it was definitely in the vein for that group I was with. But so I would say specifically, if you are somebody who cares about theater and art, that the themes here really speak to you. And I would also add, I would tell people who are afraid of prison movies. I'm thinking of Arrested Development, where young George Michael watches the show Oz, thinking it's the Wizard of Oz. But there is a crowd where you're afraid of a prison movie because there's often graphic violence and something really scary. I would say that's not the case here. It's not sugarcoating the prison experience, but there's nothing here that would really, my wife is a little squeamish, so I would throw her this movie and say, go right ahead. There's nothing there. So those would be my categories.
yeah, the thing I would add to that, supplement that, the squeamish about prison movies is Jasmine was very much like, oh, that looks depressing. I don't want to see that. Like, that's going to be sad. And it's like, there are many parts that are sad, and there's many parts that are like profoundly unjust about the situation that people find themselves in within the carceral system. However, it's really uplifting, like the pursuit of art and the stories they tell and the way that the characters interact is much more positive. And I don't know if, and we can dig into this more as we go on. I don't know if that's almost like sugarcoating too much by focusing on the positives instead of the negatives, but I think that because it's so easy to either be bummed out by what might happen in a prison movie, or sort of get this like weird visceral thrill about like, look at these bad people and bad things happening to them. And it's like a very easy compartmentalization. This defies both of those in a way that I think, I think everyone should see this.
Jen talked about this being like a particularly Academy friendly movie, and I think that that's right. So normally with the recommendation algorithm, I talk about like a specific movie. I'm not going to do that here, but in line with what Jen was saying, if you think the prison system is broken, if you have fairly progressive views on criminal justice, this movie is for you. I'm going to get into this further when we move into the rhetorical situation in particular. But like, I grew up in like a small town in Texas. If you're a more tough on crime type, I still think you should see this movie. But I'm not sure it's going to change your mind about the prison system. And we're going to talk about that. We'll talk about that later. But yeah, that's my take. Jen, what do you think?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think because this movie is primarily interested in the human experience of these men, right? And so I think that if it had to choose, it chooses that over some sort of social commentary. So I would definitely agree with that. But yeah, it's because it's at its core, it's an inspirational story, right? And so I think lots of people like those. Regardless of your political views, right? And so I think that's right. And I would say the last thing I would kind of tack on here for recommendation algorithm is like there is a lot of Shawshank Redemption running through this. So I feel like, and maybe I just haven't seen Shawshank Redemption in a long time, so I'm forgetting all the sort of like darker parts. But it's like Shawshank Redemption if no one gets physically hurt, right? But it's also not. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe we should save this for future segments. But it's also like resisting a lot of, as others have said, resisting a lot of the tropes of the genre that sort of Shawshank Redemption emblemizes. Yeah.
I just wanted to add, I forgot to say this in mine. It's a little too easy, but the four of us were big fans of theater camp last year, and this is like the perfect double feature for that, because it's like there's this weird absurdity that's kind of glazed atop both, and yet they take the subject matter so seriously that you leave like really believing in the kind of basic goodness of theater, which is it's kind of ridiculous that you could watch these two movies, but yet I think they are kind of spiritual siblings.
That's a better and more respectful double bill than mine, which was Waiting for Guffman. But a similar thing. Let's put on a show.
Yeah. That's maybe the other thing we should throw in is if you are not at all interested in prison stories, but you love a good, let's all get together and put on a show. Like if you like The Muppets Take Manhattan,
yes,
you will like this movie, I think.
So Shawshank Redemption, theater
meets
camp,
Muppets
Take Manhattan, Waiting for Guffman.
Only the smallest sidebar to say, you guys heard that they're closing the Muppet ride at Disney Hollywood Studios. So the Muppets literally have to live out that plot right now. The Muppets have to put on one big show to save their theater at Disney World. So, sorry.
All right. I think we're ready to go into spoiler mode. So if you've not yet seen Sing Sing and you would wish to remain unspoiled, please, hit pause, go try to see the movie. We all highly recommend it, and come back and rejoin us for the rest of the conversation. wish we had video because that was some good. We were rocking out to that. That was a good jam. Who knew Long Take Review had dance moves? So earlier I said that I was shocked that this was not cheesy. So why is it that this works? Like, if we're trying to dissect its success, because I feel like this has a lot in common with like a movie like Coda, which I felt like was emotionally manipulative. I don't want to relitigate Coda necessarily, but like, you know what I mean? Like it has a lot in common in the sense that it's like has these kind of moments of joy and triumph in it, but at the same time, I feel like that was emotionally manipulative, and this is not. So, like, why does this work?
I don't know if this is the answer, but what, and I don't know if this works as a contrast to Coda necessarily, but I didn't know going in that everyone but Coleman Domingo was playing themselves, and that, like, you know, I don't think that, like, at the end of the movie I was like, oh, this was authentic now. I think it felt authentic the whole time, but I think it's because these people, yeah, we're living their truth and we're embodying it. And, you know, I guess not everyone was playing themselves, but so many of the supporting cast had gone through the system, both in terms of being in prison, but also this rehabilitation through the arts program. And so I think that maybe that has something to do with it, that it has that core truth from people who lived it, and not just the adaptation of, like, here's the nice movie version of it. And so I think that maybe that helped with the details, which, again, maybe not a great parallel to Coda, because there were people who were deaf in Coda, but and probably had children or relatives that were able to hear. But I don't know, like, it had something true to it. What do you guys think?
For me, I think some of it has to do with the moments where I thought, like, okay, I know what's about to happen, and then it not happening. Um, so we mentioned earlier before we reached spoiler mode that there wasn't really a lot of violence in the movie, and I think it's because we're sort of like, we expect that to happen in this environment. We expect a death to happen in this environment, right? And a lesser movie would frame that death as the moment when everyone, like, comes to terms with whatever. It's like an inflection point, and it on to emotional whatever, right? And there's a death that does happen in this movie. We're in spoiler mode now, so I can talk about it, but it happens in a completely, like, non-violent way. It follows this sort of heartbreaking scene. You have a prisoner who has an exchange with Coleman Domingo's character, and then the next day he's dead. And at first, I looked at PT and I was like, uh-oh, did he kill himself? Did he what was going on? But it turned out, I mean, it seemed like it was some type of, like, it was some type of natural cause. It's been a
Aneurysm.
little while, right? An aneurysm, right?
Yeah.
I just saw this movie last night, so I'm going to be the one
Okay,
filling
very
in
good.
the details. I think.
Yes,
Thank you, Jen.
right. So then the prisoners still have to grapple with that, because it's still a tremendous loss. But they do it in a way that doesn't feel like the Hollywood screenplay way of doing it, right? It's the way that, like, all of us have to process unexpected death. As opposed to just like, these rival factions were going at it, and of course this person stepped across the line and whatever, and then whatever, right? So I think avoiding some of these, I don't know want to call them pitfalls necessarily, but just avoiding these sort of, like, expected beats in the film helped me to sort of it's like walking a tightrope for this movie to what you're talking about, the sort of, like, cheesy, somewhat exploitative, right, way of telling the story. So that, to me, this sort of, like, restraint and the ability, the thoughtfulness to sort of to zag instead of zig whenever the time came.
To go back to that same moment, I think I would also add that most of the decisions in this movie are from a character point of view,
Yeah,
as opposed to a premise point of view, right?
yeah,
They're not like
Yeah.
all this prison, like the prisoners aren't treated as like a monolith. right? They're individual people that the movie really develops pretty well. Even, and that's just, which again is like astonishing considering how many of them there are in the movie. Like it's a pretty big ensemble cast. And so to go back to that moment with Mike's death, I think that the movie cares mostly about the fact that he's not in the show anymore, right? And that Coleman Domingo had this earlier scene, which we saw, where they have this like really great banter. Weirdly, they are talking about escaping, but it's in a completely different context, which I thought was very layered in its meaning, right? Like, because it's like you expect them to be like, and this movie never, like, no one ever tries to break out of this prison, right? Like, which again is another trope that we sort of expect, right? And I think that scene is kind of making fun of that. But I feel like those two, like, we see how much they enjoy playing off each other in that scene, and then after Mike dies, we see Coleman Domingo's character Divine G trying to go on without him. The show must go on, right? And he just can't because it's so painful that his scene partner's gone. So I feel like that's a really good example of like how the film's able to sort of like focus on the characters and their experience in this program more than, oh, they're prisoners, like they're gonna do prisoner things.
I can't wait for next year's Oscar movie, Prisoner Things. Yeah,
Just prisoner things.
I don't want to miss my opportunity to just say the magic trick of this movie 100% worked on me. And just to make sure I get into TMI territory, this was one of my screenings where I enjoyed a very large soda, and I like was waiting for the final beat of the film, and I jumped up and started running out. And as the credits roll, they show actual footage of the program inside the prison, and that's when they start to reveal, hey, guess what? Almost everybody in this movie has been playing themselves or is a prisoner who's graduated from this program. And I mean, I really had to run out, but I stopped in the little like side aisle and I just had to stop and watch and risk all that was associated with that to be like, this is incredible. And it really blew me away because as these characters revealed themselves, and I just saw when we were all quickly Googling quotes for our opening, that a lot of the audition footage in the film is the actual audition that these prisoners use to get into the movie. And like I'd seen these actors, I'm like, these are not people you see in movies, and stands out to me as a man with facial tattoos, right? That you would cast in a prison movie, but like, oh, this is actually just a guy and he's playing himself and he's somebody who's come through that program. And so I was just completely floored because they did not sacrifice the acting to make that magic trick work. Like these are really good performers in really good performances, and it just kind of underlines the thesis of the movie in such a beautiful way. And then the other piece I'll add is, why is it not too sappy? I don't want to underestimate the fact that usually movies like this, another double feature is kind of Dead Poets Society or like a Dangerous Minds type movie. And usually it's somebody from without, who's outside the community coming in. And usually it's like a white savior, right? To like, I'll get the street kids to sing in my chorus and then they'll all be saved. And this movie is not that. And there are moments where there is a white teacher, but there are moments where he tries to reach the prisoners and Coleman Domingo's character will be like, actually, can I take a stab at this, and do it so much better. And the fact that it becomes this really lovely piece about these men being willing to be intimate, and not in the way we were talking about Joaquin Phoenix, but just emotional intimacy, and just really pulling together in a space and creating something kind of magical. That totally works on me. And Antonio alluded to like the strong male, like, let's lock everybody up. It's like, yeah, maybe we could all use a little of this. Maybe we could all use a little like space, like the long take review, where it's okay to come and share our intimate thoughts. And we can do it because Jen's here, we're safe. So yeah.
Jen is our Paul Raci.
That's what I was gonna say. I feel okay with that. I love Paul Raci is great in this movie.
He is. The one thing I want to just add in that I think helps in terms of the sentimentality is that, in addition to what you were just saying, Greg, the sort of, the white savior, and I think there are interviews with the co-writer director and Coleman Domingo talking about how they were really working to avoid that and not like marginalize that character of the teacher, but show him honestly while still keeping the spotlight on the prisoners themselves. That I think it's really important that the movie isn't, here's a bunch of the sort of real life actors who went through this, and then the Hollywood star, and the Hollywood star is the one who does everything right. Like it isn't Coleman Domingo as like the Aaron Sorkin character that has all the answers to everything. Like he has stretches where he is really struggling with his life, with the production. He gets kind of petty and bitchy at times, which is great. Like I think that's really like that helps make this all feel more real and doesn't sort of elevate that central character over the other ones around him. And I think that helps stop this from being too cheesy.
I love it. So, Antonio, you mentioned earlier, how this film sort of represents incarceration or the criminal justice system. Maybe we should talk more about that. Like, what do we think is actually happening here in terms of like what does the movie want to say about that, I guess?
The thing I want to point out in terms of its visual representation of incarceration that I loved was I thought it was really successful at representing space,
Mm.
and the limitations in space in particular. Um, Again, I mentioned we've all seen prison movies. We're sort of accustomed to like what a prison looks like, to bars and to whatever, to the point where like there's no novelty to it. We're just like, okay, I know what a prison looks like. But this prison had very specific dimensions. I remember the way, like, again, I'd seen this like a while back, but I remember like canned goods, like stacked up. Um, I remember like the narrow wedge of like where the bed was, how the books were lined up. Whenever the guard came in and started and like just took everything and like threw it all about, thinking like I understand this space as like a space, as like a place where this person has to exist now, like for this time, as opposed to just sort of like the the general idea of a prison that I had in my head before. And that I think is essential to the movie, to really understanding like the predicament and the plight that these characters find themselves in. The fact that the we mentioned the scene where Coleman Domingo's character Divine G, right, is having with Mike. They can have this conversation, the two of them, even though they're in separate cells, because their cells are so close. Right, and because the spaces are so small. So I think that it did that really well in a way that other films I feel like didn't. I mean, it stood out to me as a particular success of this film. How about the rest of you?
Yeah, I feel like the exterior shots of their cell doors was super powerful
Mhm.
because it's like you see how narrow they are.
Yeah.
And the editing in this film is really strong because the way that it cuts back and forth between the sort of expansiveness of the theater space, right? Like it's not like a huge, it's relatively huge compared to their prison cells, right? But also the expansiveness of like possibility, right? You get a sense, it's like it feels like that anything's possible. They have lots of space to stretch out, both physically and sort of existentially when they're there, but then it quickly cuts back oftentimes to the cells and you suddenly are faced with the reality of like that it's so confined. What does everyone else think?
I want to add to that the air movement, because there are a few ways in which that's present. And so like when you're seeing the characters crammed in these small spaces and everything Antonio just said, and to me the sense was like how they tried to desperately to have some control over their small cell because that's all they could control. And then when the search happens, it's like, nope, you don't get to control this either. But there are a few places in the film where they will stand near an open window and you get the kind of feeling of the air coming in, all the way up until the very end of the film. And again, we're in spoiler mode. So when the two characters have been released and it's just like they're standing on the outside of the prison, seeing how small it is. And then I believe the final shot of the film is just fresh air flowing through an open car window. And it's like, a lesser movie would have been like, and now I feel free again or something. But they just let the facial expression like show you like that's what prison is in this movie, is stagnation in kind of every sense, and the inability to escape that. And um, I did want to note, Jen, you mentioned Shawshank, and this is so important to like show a modern prison compared to that. And I don't know about you all in your classrooms, but when Orange is the New Black was really popular, I got a lot of prison reform papers. Like that was an issue on a lot of college students' minds because they were all in love with those characters in that show. And I don't, sorry, Sing Sing, I don't think it's going to have the market penetration that show did at that particular moment. But I'm struck by how I would watch this, and if I was, I am somebody who can be inspired by it, and it affects how I vote and how I think about these issues. And I can see a lot of young people kind of latching on to this and really caring about this issue more, because I do think it's faded as Orange is the New Black is kind of in the rear view. I haven't seen many papers on rehabilitation versus punishment and so on, but maybe I just have a bad crew.
Or you don't have enough students who care about the thoughts of Kim Kardashian, who has focused her lawyerly pursuits on prison reform. I will add, I think everything that you're saying is all I wanted to say about sort of the space and the filming and the cinematography and editing and the ways that it presents. It visually presents a lot of the things I think we were worried about in terms of kind of tropey storytelling about prison. It gets that sort of suffocating sensation without monologues about it, and without characters sort of fighting through it, like literally or even just like emotionally. They're you're seeing it, and so you get to kind of feel it and live in it. The other part that I will just mention is that I don't. Is it the parole board? I thought it was like a commutation board. I think it's like from the governor's office where Coleman Domingo Divine G goes in, and how indifferent they seem to be both to the evidence that he has found and also to the work he's doing in this program, which is it was in the trailer, which is why I was able to use it in the opening. The like, are you acting now? Like, are you acting as part of this hearing? But even though I had seen that trailer like 5 or 6 times before I saw the movie, because you go see this movies in the small theater, they will have this kind of trailer there. When that played in the screening, it like you felt like a collective. It was like an intake of breath that was also somehow like a groan of pain in the audience, of just like, oh Jesus, like none of this has mattered to the system, and no one sees this as being valuable, and no one sees these people as being valuable. They're all kind of it's so dehumanizing in a way I thought was a lot more effective than like mean prison guards, or like the warden comes in and he's corrupt. It was just it's the people who come in from the offices to try to I'm sure their job's very hard, but they come across as the barriers to getting justice and getting some real redemption for these characters.
Well, there's also very, very brief and pretty downplayed mention of the, like, I can't remember the technical term, but you get a sense that when Divine G was arrested, that there was some kind of miscarriage of justice, right? That like either the police did something wrong, or like there was police brutality. Even like I feel like it goes by so fast, but it's definitely there, and the fact that they just kind of the conversation sort of glosses over it, and he can't say anything back. You know what I mean? Like he has to be so polite and deferent in that conversation. He can't really advocate for himself at all. I think that is way more powerful than if like we had seen a tape of him getting like beaten by a police officer. You know what I mean? Like, or like, the restraint here I think is much more powerful.
Can I ask a question though of all of you? I mean, I think I gather the answer based on what I just heard, but so does everyone here agree that Divine G was innocent and that he was wrongfully convicted.
I would say yes, and I would say the people making the film definitely do, because I've seen marketing materials or descriptions, log lines, that synopses, that sort of thing, that say like he was put in prison wrongfully.
Okay.
I
Go ahead.
thought I saw that in Jen's description in our show notes, that like wrongfully imprisoned, and I agree. Now it's triggered my memory of that scene where he's like, here are a few pieces of key evidence that were overlooked. But I actually, in that moment, I was like, oh, he was innocent. Like I'd forgotten, because it's so not a part of the film. The film is much more like, what do you do in this space, than it is like, how did he get to this space. And
Right.
so I do think he was innocent, because I do remember that scene well. But it was shocking to me that I was like, oh, that really wasn't the plot, though. And even when he's eventually let out, I don't think it's defined carefully, but it felt much more like a parole than it did like, getting out early for good behavior, than it did, you are actually innocent and should have never been in here.
For me, I mean, this is partly because I'm a lawyer, is that I was interested in the idea. I was interested in your takes on it because, on the one hand, all of this evidence, but and part of this was him referencing that the Innocence Project and these other places, like, took up the case and they didn't succeed. And so my read of that was like, maybe he's not innocent, right? Like, maybe, like, if all of these agencies did the work, if there actually was like all of this evidence that was available, and he had those resources like doing the work for him, then maybe this is me being overly optimistic about those organizations, but they do good work, and I've seen them, present that kind of evidence and get people off, right? From a narrative perspective, from a story perspective, it changes how I view Divine G's arc a little bit, based on whether this is the story of someone who was wrongfully convicted, um, but then finds some light in this place he doesn't need to be, versus whether he was guilty of the crime, he doesn't belong in this place. And so I remember when I was an attorney, I worked on a clemency petition, and this was for a death penalty case. And there was no question this person was guilty. He'd committed murder. But and there are two general categories for clemency. There's innocence, meaning like just the system didn't work and we have evidence showing that they're innocent, or extenuating circumstances for guilt. And in this particular case, it was that you can't execute someone in America if they are a juvenile. You can't execute someone if they're mentally incapacitated. Here, my client was on the edge of both. He was just over the age,
Mm.
for being considered a juvenile in the state of Virginia. He just, like, outside the range. I mean, with the psychologists who were involved, there was debate about his mental incapacity, and they were just like, he's just sane enough to where you can execute him, right?
Oof.
So the clemency petition is just it was a very different thing, right? It's the argument isn't, here's all this evidence, like, because we knew he'd already admitted, there was no question of that. Um but again, from Divine G's perspective, and sort of like how I viewed the character, because the character is on the one hand, it's like, of course he's innocent. Like, um he seems like he does not belong in this place, because of like just the way that he's speaking, the way that the sort of light within him. um uh but in some ways, the other characters, I feel like it made the other characters shine in a way, because like, um Divine Eye, for example, right? There's no question that Divine Eye committed. I don't think the movie presents that as a
They never
question as to
say.
whether he
Yeah.
committed the crimes. Yeah, I think that but watching his movement and his arc throughout the story felt to me more powerful. Partly because of like, there was a clarity on that level of like, this is a person who is changing, as opposed to just like, this is a person who never belonged here, and is and so and we just have to find the right devices to get him out. So yeah, that's why I was curious about it. So
Well, first of all, thank you for schooling us in in the law. I really feel bad that I deleted our Law and Order dun dun sound drop because I think I could have easily brought it back here. The thing I would sort of counter that with is I think two things. One, the film I think is actually not interested at all in who's guilty and who's innocent. I think the movie would much rather us be like, no, like it doesn't, no one cares if you are guilty or innocent once you get here, right? Like that everyone is treated the same and everyone has to go through this experience. And so that whether or not you were guilty or innocent, like prison still harms you in the same way. It still does the same thing to you, right? So I think that's one thing. And then the other thing is that, again, to go back to that clemency interview, they do the I think the film is very purposeful in that his case in that moment hinges entirely on sort of like a clerical bureaucratic limitation, right? It's because they have the tape of someone else confessing to the crime, but the person who made the tape is deceased and they can no longer verify whether or not it's real. And so like it so I to me that's very intentional that it's like, because I think it does kind of have a Chancery Lane kind of Dickens sort of like, oh, the weight of bureaucracy, like the criminal justice system can really weigh down on you if because of like and they really show how Divine G he has to educate himself so much on legal proceedings and he has to do so much research and stuff like that. He has all these stacks of papers he's carrying around with him through the whole movie, right? Just other things to think about. Should we move into rhetorical situation so we can kind of keep digging into this? So this is the rhetorical situation, a segment in which we look at a film through the lens of our academic experience. So all four of our regular co-hosts, and everyone's here today, that means extra, are writing professors. So we like to have this section of the episode dedicated to making connections to our experience as scholars and teachers. And the rhetorical situation refers to any contextual factors that influence composing and interpretation. To me, the big one that sticks out here is acting as a process. And that to me really resonated because we teach writing as a process. And that's a big part of our jobs is to get our students to understand that it is that to understand that process is important. And this is a big movie that's like very pro arts, right? And we are also pro arts. So anyone can take that in any direction.
I mean, there is also writing in this because they're writing their own show. And maybe that's a good example of where like you can't use every idea you come up with. Sometimes we have to tell our students that of just sort of like, yeah, you may have, 15 great points to make about the topic at hand, but the actual final product can only sustain like 6 or 7 of those and find the ones that actually fit together instead of it being mummies and Hamlet and
Freddy Krueger,
cowboys, gunslingers, and everything else. Like maybe it doesn't all come together in an essay. I mean, this play is a masterpiece, so I don't want to. I don't want to disparage it.
Well, I'll take the opening there because one of the things I was thinking about is, the film is constructed to show that this is a cyclical process. They are just finishing Midsummer Night's Dream, I believe, and as the as the film opens, and then the end of the play, they're planning like what's the next show. And I was thinking a lot about the choice to not show us the creation of Midsummer Night's Dream because when we talk about Oscar bait or we talk about like true love of arts, that feels like the one you'd show us, right? Like, let's talk about the power of Shakespeare century later to speak to these incarcerated men. And the fact that they took something totally absurd to be the focal point, I thought was kind of profound. Maybe that's overselling it, but it's like, it doesn't have to be good art. Just the experience of doing something and coming together and creating a space where you can create together. I thought was really and that is to me like the spirit of theater camp too. Like the Joan Still is a terrible play, but like it meant so much in the world of that film that both of these are like, transformative for the actors, and that to me is, beautiful catharsis for me, sitting in the audience of like, sometimes I sit in a movie and I'm like, wow, like we can do this, like humans can do this, like that's amazing, like it's wonderful. And I really kind of felt that when we were talking about the hope, that's where it came from, that like, there's a reason why we're still telling the same stories we told around campfires as ancient cavemen. And it's kind of beautiful that it can come together and be absurd. Not specifically time travel with gladiators when we were around the campfire, but something similar.
One thing that I like about its representation of theater is that I think it's people who make theater are like there's a certain amount of bravery that has to come into it, and like um when they do the sort of like exercises, the sort of silly exercises that are designed to sort of warm them up, I remember watching those and thinking like I would hate to have to do that. Right? Because and like even with like my friends, even with like the three of you, like I would have difficulty in a room just like letting go of inhibitions. So in but imagine in a prison where so much of like so much sometimes like your safety like can be dependent on like how others view you and like and perceptions or whatever, like that the fact that they can let that go and be ridiculous and be absurd and make a show that seems like really really silly, and that might, you know under other circumstances they might be like, I can't do that, that's like too humiliating, like giving in to the theater, right, to the spirit of just sort of like making something, creating something. I think you're right, PT, that like that the choice of like building something that is their own, but that is also ragged and not like written by a genius, right? Um, that speaks more to the spirit of the movie and to the character's journey than it does them sort of like, well, let's just do a production of a Shakespearean work that's been done 1,000 times before, right?
Yeah, I also think that it's an interesting dynamic, going back to what we were saying before about how the movie avoiding white savior topics, where it's Paul Raci's character is the one doing the writing, but he's basically just like, yeah, this is what you all said. Like, you all said these are the things you wanted, and so I did that. And it feels funny in the moment when he's talking about that, where it's like, oh, like you're maybe this guy's not very good at writing things either, and it's just like, yes, like I'm using this creative inspiration. But as it goes forward, and as the sort of the goofiness of the show is clearer and clearer, and even Divine G calls it out from when he's at a low point, that it's they're allowed to do it. Like, he's basically like, yeah, whatever you guys want, I'll do. Like, I'll write down, if you want it to be this weird time traveling story and include all these different genres, all these different things, and this copyright infringement, I'll fine. Like, that's cool. Like, because that's a freedom you have in a space that is defined by your lack of freedom. Like, that's what he's providing for them. And it really sort of, again, centered the actors, the performers, in the story, both for us as the audience, and also for them as people within this world.
We often have to teach students that writing is not, while they may care more realistically about the end product, that writing is most valuable as an epistemological tool, right? And by that I mean, for our listeners, because they were like, that's probably a big word, that just means writing is a way of knowing, right? Or of gaining new knowledge. And I feel like this movie is like a really beautiful example of that, because through all those exercises that they do, it's not, Antonio, I totally agree that it's about the sort of vulnerability and the bravery in being that vulnerable, that it gets that skill that it cultivates for them, and helps with the rehabilitation process. But you also see that they learn things about themselves and each other right, through the process of doing this. And it's almost like, in particular, there are two scenes where Paul Racy's character, who I think his name is Brent, asks them to close, like, it's the close your eyes exercises, like close your eyes, imagine. I think the first one is imagine that you are like, where's your happy spot, like where would you go if you could go anywhere, and like what does it look like, what does it smell like, where, who's there with you, like he's asking them all these kind of prompting questions. And it's a heuristic, right? It's a really good heuristic. And I'm not getting paid by USC's writing program to drop all these terms, but through that, they then kind of like, they come to these like epiphanies, you know what I mean? Like, and it's both because to be good actors, they have to learn how to use their imaginations and be able to transport themselves to other people and other places, right? That's what makes an actor skilled. But at the same time, that is also helping them process their experience as incarcerated men, right? So like, yeah, I think it, I don't know, really works well.
It also is not in a level where I think this is the reason it was made, but on a very crass level, this like, isn't art important? Doesn't art change lives?
Yes.
Can really set them up for success in our next category on the podcast, which is Oscars watch.
Yes, I was going to make that exact segue. I love it. It's we're all collaborating in this process together. Okay, so yeah, Oscars watch. I think let's just get into it. Okay, so I totally agree that the pro arts, can't the arts change lives, part of this is going to be like catnip for the Academy. I can see the narrative already, right? Like the power of the art. It's the new version. It's the 2.0 version of Isn't Hollywood Great? Like, let's move, because the cliche is that movies that are about making movies always win the Oscars, right? And so I feel like this is a more kind of evolved version of that, where it's like, can't acting and the arts change lives?
Yes,
I mean,
aren't we really good and important?
Right. And finally the cynicism comes out, which I feel bad about considering how not cynical this, or
yes.
how not cynical this movie is. But yeah, I guess I'm pretty firmly in the belief that, you know, it's early in the season, but I have pretty like a lot of confidence that this will at least get some nominations. How big a player it will be is too early to tell, I think, in terms of wins and stuff like that. But how big is this going to be, do you think? And like, what categories are we talking about here?
I mean, we all agree for sure. Best Actor nomination for Coleman Domingo, and that was the one that I think all of us going into the movie were fairly certain was going to happen, right?
Right.
And having watched the movie and listening, like I think all of us agree on that. I think Clarence Macklin for Best Supporting Actor is a solid possibility. To me, it was the revelation of the film. I thought he was really incredible with his character, who again also could have veered into like cliche territories in the presentation. But I thought that he grounded that character really well. I found his arc to be really satisfying. Screenplay. Um, as a possibility. I think then for me, in terms of I'm doing it from most likely to least likely. I think Jen's right that it's a solid possibility picture, and then it's a lesser possibility for best director after that. If for no other reason than because there are just fewer slots for director. And that's where I landed. How about the rest of you?
I think that's a solid list if we were ranking it in order of likelihood. For better, for, you know, I would say for worse. I think supporting actor I would put beneath screenplay and maybe even picture.
Okay.
Just because there's 10 slots for picture, so I think that's likely. We're prognosticating blind because we haven't seen the rest of the field. I would absolutely, Clarence Macklin is slotted in supporting actor. There's another kind of direction this veers in if this really becomes beloved, where Paul Racy maybe gets in just because he got nominated for Sound of Metal, and so it's sort of like the other familiar face of an outside actor, but I think that that's very unlikely. I also think below the line, probably not, but I could see some arguments for editing or cinematography just because of the ways in which the visuals of it. It's not flashy, so I could see it maybe not getting there, but those branches are usually pretty good about honing in on, oh, that's actually really good craft for this. So those do seem possible, if if unlikely, but I think those four that you mentioned are the ones that I would say I certainly have them sort of in that for my own list right now, and I would not be surprised to see them make it through.
Really complete agreement. I have been going further in my casual conversation saying it's Coleman Domingo's award to lose. I thought how far he got on his Rustin nomination, which was a really imperfect movie, not a bad performance, but an imperfect movie, I think shows there's a lot of goodwill and he's there. But then I was at a small town festival in New Hampshire, and they had a big mural up, and the mural was like, "Write on here what you love about our hometown," and like everybody had written like, "I love the fields, I love the fresh air," and in one corner somebody had put Timothy Chalamet for life and just walked away, which made me so happy. He has no connection to my hometown that I'm aware of. But it reminds me that I think Coleman Domingo probably saw that Bob Dylan trailer and was like, uh-oh, because I think in terms of the field we know, I think that's the one that seems like it's going to threaten this based on where Timothy Chalamet is kind of in his career and how small town New Hampshire has already fallen for him. I'll throw it back to you, Jen, just so that you have something to pick up on. Question for you: do you think this goes Golden Globe Best Drama, Best Comedy Musical? Which do you think they might try to edge to the other side?
Oh, that would make me so mad. I mean, I think, yes, you're totally right. This is exactly the type of movie that would be confoundingly placed in comedy or musical because they're putting on a show. That's a distinct possibility. I think it should be drama. I think, just by nature of the subject matter and, but it is very funny too. That's the thing is like, it like, I laughed a lot more than I thought I would watching this. It's very endearing and funny. And yeah, so
this is a question I should know the answer to. Who decides how those movies get slotted? Is that a campaign decision or is that a Globe's decision?
I think that might be a Globe's decision.
I think it's a Globe's decision.
I don't think they get to choose.
Yeah,
and I think that's why we've
Globe.
had lots of weird cases where people are scratching their heads of like, why is this in here? Like,
because I feel like the campaign side would not want to have the movie be thought of as like being like almost like marginalized or well, this is a trifle. This is like a little haha fun time. I think they want to respect and elevate both the importance of the work being done in the arts program and also the struggles of these prisoners.
Just because I invoked it before, remember Orange is the New Black was always in the comedy categories for the Emmys because it was
true.
a half hour. And those are even more problematic than the movie categories,
Nice.
especially with Laugh a Minute Show the Bear always cleaning up in those categories now. But so I think if it's up to the studios, I think you're right. We also, as we're talking about chances, never doubt A24. They seem to have cracked this pretty well. These Oscar races, they've had good dominance, but they have a lot of ponies this year in the race. So it's going to be hard for them to manage all of these campaigns if they really want to make a push for all of the films I think are worthy of them that they've put out so far this year. There, now I proved I was an A24 bro. I'm done. I'm out.
You did it. You can check that box. I really think the strongest possibility here is Coleman Domingo for Best Actor, even just by virtue of the we often see the pattern of they're in the race but not really a contender to win, and then the next time they are nominated is they can make the big push. And so I feel like he's just it's like right place, right time, perfect storm. I think for him to take it, though, Timothy. We'll have to wait and see on Timothy Chalamet as Bob Dylan. I don't know.
It's a good trailer,
but you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot more, and he's doing his own singing, which I think a lot of people respect. But for every person who thinks that, there's another person who's like, "How dare you? You don't sound like Bob Dylan." So it's it'll be interesting. But like you're right. That is a lot more traditionally Oscar baity. So it'd be interesting to see if sort of like the biopic pull is strong enough to
Plus
overtake.
the giving the Oscar for someone in a year that they're in a big blockbuster that is going to be Oscar friendly. But I also feel like I feel like the members of the Academy, and of course we keep talking about the Academy as if it's like one monolith like robot moving around instead of 10,000 lions forming this big Voltron, that it's but the members who will be worried about the image or narrative of things is like, do we want to give this little white kid an award for a boomer icon when we could be rewarding a black man for talking about being how important art is for non-famous people, non Nobel Prize winning songwriters. So I could see that working in his favor. It also seemed like part of the Rustin narrative was just how much everyone who's ever worked with him loves Coleman Domingo and how great his reputation is within the Academy. So I do feel like the perfect storm is Coleman Domingo being incredible as a performer, Coleman Domingo apparently being incredible as a person and coworker, the last year nomination not getting over the finish line, but now they have a chance to get him there. Plus, it's this story that once again is about like the kind of stuff we do, not the direct things that we do, but the kind of things that we do can actually change people's lives and reform things. And like, isn't that great? Which is a little cynical to say, but also like we do support the arts, we do support creativity, and it's not bad to have those things celebrated and rewarded and recognized for the things that they can do, especially when it's so easy to dismiss ever spending any money. Everything should go to STEM funding instead of anything for arts or creativity and blah 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 blah, because that's all like frivolous extra stuff that like isn't important and doesn't actually help anyone or change anything. And so it's I do think he's the front runner. I think that he's there barring some other mind-blowing performance, and I think Chalamet has to be really incredible to take pole position away.
So the last thing I'll say as we wrap up, I think, is like, if I'm consulting for the awards campaign for this movie, you need to get the supporting cast out on the campaign trail. Like, they need to be on every red carpet. They need to be doing interviews together, because we've seen that work so well. Everything, everywhere, all at once. You could argue that's what pushed them over the finish line, is that they were just out there as a group, being charming, being amazing everywhere they went, right?
Coda too, right? Since you already invoked them, Coda. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's how they went. They were taking photos at the White House with Dr. Jill Biden days before the Oscars. It was a genius. So yeah, I think if that's how they can. And because my thing right now is like, I'm not sure if this would be a complete Oscar puzzle Best Picture nominee of the, like, it gets editing, it has to get all the big categories: acting, actor, supporting actor, editing, score, maybe even, right, question mark, like my mind starts running. But then it also could be like the women talking
Mm-hmm.
Or Past Lives, that only gets 1-2 nominations, right? You know what I mean? So in addition, or one
Antonio
nomination
is on, Jen. How dare you insult Past Lives? Like, oh, let me just cut Antonio open on our final 5 minutes of the podcast. My God.
Rough.
My apologies. I love Past Lives, but I'm just being real. Okay.
I'm looking the only place I can find, because I don't know if any of the odds category, Gold Derby is focused on the Emmys right now. So I'm looking at the Variety predictions, which sort of constantly gets updated. It's Clayton Davis. They always seem a little crazy. Right now, they have Denzel Washington winning Best Actor for Gladiator 2, which is crazy because he's probably going to be campaigned in supporting actor. but whatever. So with that in mind, I'm just looking. I was like, what even are the potential adapted screenplay competitions with this? And it's a complete unknown. The Dylan documentary, Conclave. See other
Nickel
episodes for
Boys. Nickel
discussions
Boys
of
is the big
popes.
one.
Nickel Boys is the one and presumed to be the winner, and then The Room Next Door, which is the new Almodovar movie. So again, Denzel Washington, lead actor for Gladiator 2, as the winner. This may not be a great list or a fully well thought out one, but like, again, depending on how Nickel Boys does, all due respect to Greg and his hype draft pick, hopefully that is incredible and that sort of slots right in there. I could easily see Sing Sing. If Nickel Boys is sort of like not as strong, I could see Sing Sing becoming the leader here. To your point about women talking.
Not totally unrelated films, which might hurt both
True.
of them, right? That they both are essentially take place in correctional
like they're going to
facilities.
cancel each other out.
Just potentially. That's a little troublesome. That makes me nervous listening to that. And that's Amazon, who have gotten better at campaigning. So we'll see.
Yeah. But A24 has a really good track record. So they're in good hands, I think. All right. This was so fun to get to talk about this movie with all of you. Antonio, where can folks find you? And I know there's only one place.
They can find me on Letterboxd at Aelefano, Aelefano. Greg, where can people find you?
Anywhere you want to find me online, if I'm there, I'm Ion Cannon, EYEONCANON. PT, where can people find you and the podcast?
For me, like Antonio, just find me hanging out on Letterboxd, watching way too many movies. My handle there is PT McNiff, PTMCNIFF. If you want to follow the show, you can follow us there at LTR Pod, or look at the hashtag LTR Pod, and you can see each of our individual reviews that we may have posted for various things that we have seen. You can also find the show over on Instagram and Threads at The Long Take Review. Or you can subscribe wherever you are listening to this podcast right now, whether going to Jen Substack or Apple Music, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, wherever you are right now. Subscribe, maybe leave a little review. Why don't you give us a rating? And you can even mention it to your friends if you think you have friends who want to listen to people talk about movies like this. Jen, where can folks find you?
I just want to say, at first, I thought you were going to end with, if you think you have friends.
Period. If you think you have friends.
That was great. Sorry. You can find me on Instagram and Threads at Sopchockchai, SOPCHOCKCHAI, and on Letterboxd at Qui-Gon Jen. Gentlemen, I think you're becoming podcasters. Thanks for listening. You can follow The Long Take Review on Substack at thelongtake.substack.com. Subscribe for free to receive new podcast episodes, as well as written reviews of films with Oscar buzz and new films and series from pop franchises like Star Wars and Marvel.